I just decided I was going to have some fun with this because any of you guys that have been to the house, bartending has kind of become a hobby of mine. And when Rodney and I were out at one of the dance events, he expressed some concern. He's like, man, I don't know what to drink. I'm like, well, funny enough, I can help with it. The entire point of this is to give you guys kind of a jumping off point. This is not the right way to do it. It's not the only way to do it. This is very much just kind of a right down the middle template of a good place to start. And then once you've got a good foothold, play around with it. What I'm going to be working with today is I'm working off a template of a sour. Who has an idea what that is? Don't be shy. Anybody? All right, Adam.
It sours the taste.
Okay. Maria?
A little lip.
I used to always get whiskey sours.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good.
At its core, it is nothing but spirit, citrus, and some kind of sweetener. Now you'll notice that there are a few different bottles here. That is exactly what we're doing, is we are going to be using that same template, and I'm going to show you how it changes when you swap out the different spirits. So at the very top, I want to start with kind of the quintessential sour, which is the daiquiri. Now, a lot of people are surprised to find out that the daiquiri is a cocktail and not just one of those like blender drinks that you get at like TGI Fridays. Okay. The strawberry daiquiri is a thing, and if it's made correctly, it's not bad. And this is what I forgot, ice. It's going to be kind of important. Just grab one of the bags, if you don't mind. Thank you. And so the idea being that for a traditional daiquiri, it is nothing but rum. No, the shaker ice.
Shaker ice?
Yep. There you go. Lime juice and sugar syrup. Now, this is probably not what you were expecting for sugar syrup. And if you're wondering why this looks like motor oil, there's a very good answer for that. The only actual sugar I had in my house was raw sugar. So that's what we're working with. But you can play with different sweeteners. And if you make a sugar syrup with raw sugar, it's going to taste a little bit different than if you make it with regular white table sugar. So the basic recipe, the basic spec on a lot of these is really simple. It's generally 2 ounces of given spirit, usually about 1 ounce of the citrus. And then depending on exactly how sweet you want it, between 3/4 of an ounce to 1 ounce of the sweetener. And so because I'm doing this in a larger setting, I've got a cheat sheet of exactly what the math is to scale that up because math is not my strong suit. The other thing is I like using block ice for a couple of reasons. There's a bartender by the name of David Lundrich who at this like cocktail conference they have every year called Tales of Cocktail did a study basically, and he determined that the optimal setup is 1 big cube and then 1 cracked cube to get you the best balance of agitation and dilution. Because who here has an idea of why you shake a cocktail as opposed to stir a cocktail? Anybody? Dealer? No stupid answers, just stupid people.
More frothy, right?
Exactly. So it aerates a little bit differently. If you were to take a daiquiri and you were to actually do it as a stirred cocktail, it would be too harsh because all those little bubbles are actually giving you kind of some insulation on your tongue, and so it's not sitting quite as flat as it normally would. Generally, the rule is shaken cocktails are going to involve some kind of fruit juice or ingredients that don't normally mix well together. If it's just liquors, or if it's liquors and a basic syrup, you can typically get away with stirring. There's no quart ounce on that, so I'm going to kind of eyeball it. And so Again, the idea being is that with all of this, you've got one big cube, and that's kind of like the ball bearing in the paint can, so that's really what's there for agitation. But this is what people don't realize, is that ice is an ingredient as much as it is a piece of hardware, because as it melts, the water is going to dilute the cocktail to a certain degree. You want that, because just like putting a few drops of water in a glass of whiskey opens it up, it does the same thing here. If you were to just take the ingredients and around this, because clearly I didn't do my prep work right.
What's your preference?
Say what?
What is your preference?
For?
Shaking and stirring.
Oh, no, I said I didn't do my prep work.
Well, what is your preference?
I don't have a preference. There's no hard and fast rule. I generally go with whatever is best suited for the drink. So again, something like a daiquiri, I will always shake it. Martinis are designed to be stirred, and they're designed to be gin. Anybody that orders a vodka martini, they just want a cold shot of vodka, but they want to feel fancy about it.
Sure. Okay.
Like quite literally, I only keep vodka in the house to be polite because I don't drink it.
Horrible.
I respect it.
Because there is not a single vodka cocktail that you can't replace with a different spirit and make it a little bit more interesting.
What vodka do you keep in your house?
Typically, whatever somebody brings over.
No,
We're
it-
gifted.
You leave whatever you want.
right, yeah.
If I am buying vodka, which is very rare, I'm probably going to buy it from Whitmire's Distillery just because it's a local business and I like supporting them. Tito's is another Texas staple. That is a pretty safe bet, but yeah, vodka is definitely one of those where if you're paying more than $20 for it, you're really just trying to show off because there's no appreciable difference. Let's see here.
Vodka every Christmas present.
Yeah.
What do you pay more than $50 for?
So that is a very loaded question
Yeah.
because value is very subjective.
Sorry.
Generally speaking, whiskeys, whether it be Scotch, bourbon, Irish, what have you, there are some sub $20 bottles that you can get out there that are pretty good. But for the most part, it's really going to be in that 30 to 35 plus is when it's going to start getting to a point that you're going to be able to notice a difference in quality.
Have you had the Whitmire's Peach?
Yes, actually, I made a cocktail with that for the last dance studio. So that's 15. Okay, we should do that. So, if you want to play Van and Light and pass those around, make sure it's actually. Okay, I like that. So, and again, just kind of give you an idea what we're doing here. We're doing 1 ounce portions. We got 5 cocktails, so once we work through all of this, it'll basically be a drink. And then whichever one is your favorite, I'll be more than happy to mix you up one, but just in the guise of being a responsible host, I figured this was the most appropriate way to go about it.
Boom, these two.
And so
Right here.
you should be able, be one more?
What is this called for them?
This is a daiquiri, just a straight daiquiri. And you should be able to taste all the different elements to it. So you should be able to get, the lime is going to be right up front, a little bit of sweetness, and if you're a bit of a geek and paying super close attention, the fact that it's a raw sugar will show a little bit of kind of a molasses flavor. But, you know, the rum is a very broad category. And this is one of those where some people, like, they don't know what they're doing in the world of rum. Rum is like wine, just in terms of association. There is so much breadth and variety that you can have everything from very bright and kind of citrusy to very dark and sweet and syrupy and everything in between. This base for a daiquiri is generally going to be a white rum. This is where some people get mixed up, because in rum, just because it's clear doesn't necessarily mean it's unaged. This is 4 years old. They actually filter it out to make it clear again. It's one of the few spirits that kind of plays that game. Typically, when you see something like whiskey, this means that it's old. With rum, dark doesn't necessarily mean old, and vice versa. So there's not a lot of rules with it, and so there's a lot to kind of play around with. What I'm going to do is, when everything is wrapped, I put kind of a little primer together, and there's some recommendations of a good place to start, but Florida Cognac is a pretty safe bet for that. If you were to do this with a different rum, it's going to kind of change what you're going to taste. It would bring a little bit more kind of burnt sugar to the flavor, things like that, and that's why I like this as a starting point, because it really gives you an idea of the variety. And what you can do when you do this at home is, you're obviously going to buy a bottle of rum to start. So the first thing to play with is the ratio of how much citrus and how much sugar. When you talk about cocktails, dry does not mean actually dry. We're dealing with liquids here. What it means is the amount of sugar in it. So a dry daiquiri is going to have less sugar syrup in it than not. Some people like real, just aggressively sugary drinks. Typically, those are the ones that don't care for the taste of alcohol. But was this too harsh and aggressive for anybody? Okay. And it's just a standard run-of-the-mill cocktail. This is not something that you're going to find at like a nightclub where they are just pouring drinks for people to get drunk. You go into any bar that has a respectable cocktail program, no bartender will turn their nose up at you ordering this drink. And some of them will take it as a challenge, because since it's just these 3 ingredients, it is so easy to screw up that there's nothing to hide behind. So I'm also a bit of a food geek, and if you ever listen to like Wolfgang Puck, he tests out new cooks by having them make an omelet, because it's so simple. You can tell exactly how good somebody is by that. This is kind of the bartender's equivalent. So the other reason I like it is it's always a safe bet, especially in this kind of climate. It's always, it's got that bright citrus note, so it's going to be nice and refreshing. It's not too heavy. So it is definitely a summertime favorite for me. Before I move to the next one other thing about sugar syrup. It's not just there to make things sweet, because it's also adding a certain viscosity to the drink. If you were to leave it out entirely, it wouldn't kind of hang on your tongue as much. So even absent the sweetness, it would affect how your tongue is interacting with the drink, so it's going to change what it tastes like. There's a lot of kind of weird chemistry and stuff like that kind of comes into this. So it looks like I should be able to get away with doubles for the rest of these, so that'll be for me later. Next one, you guys are in Texas. If you don't know how to make a margarita, get out now. It's basically just the tequila version of a sour. So again, we've got our base spirit, lime juice again. Now, instead of just a sugar syrup, which you could certainly use, most margaritas use some kind of orange liqueur. It's there, again, for sweetness, but it also brings another element into the equation in terms of flavor. So you can play around with which one you want to use. Thank you. And like one of the restaurants Danielle used to work at, they would use Grand Marnier, which has a very different taste than the Cointreau because Grand Marnier uses a brandy base, so it's got a very different flavor. And the nice thing is that this is one of those areas where you can kind of improvise a little bit and, again, kind of show a little bit of flair. But the baseline is very much the same because it's just 2 ounces of the spirit. It's going to be 1 ounce of lime, and then again, depending on exactly how sweet you want it, 3/4 to a full ounce of the Cointreau. There's debates on exactly what the, whether this should be served straight up, served on the rocks. That was kind of dealer's choice. When I'm doing these at home and I'm feeling particularly lazy, I will typically just use crushed ice out of my freezer, and I won't strain the drink. I'll do what they call a shake and dump, which is exactly that. You're just shaking it over whatever ice you're using, and then dumping the whole tin into your preferred service piece. There's no right or wrong for that. The advantage of serving it over ice is going to be the fact that it stays colder longer, but it obviously is going to dilute as well. So there are certainly advantages to serving it up instead. So with some of them, like the daiquiri, you pretty much never see over ice. It's always straight up in some kind of stemware. But this one you can kind of play around with a little bit. The salt rim is obviously a welcome touch. I like using tahini instead, just because it's a little bit more interesting of a flavor. It's not just the salt. So you can kind of play around with that. And if you are wanting to do something like a flavored margarita, pineapple, strawberry, what have you, then having something other than just the salt around the edge can kind of tie that in as well.
Tahini is the red stuff.
Yes. It's kind of a chili, salt, and tamarind combo. It also works real well with beer. One of the other reasons that I like using the big block ice is you can typically shake a little bit longer and not worry about over diluting the drink, because we've all gotten that watery cocktail that is kind of depressing and feels like a rip-off. But that's another advantage of doing this kind of stuff at home, is you can kind of get a feel for that, because an under-diluted cocktail is a lot like somebody's really bad homemade lemonade when you take a sip of it and just kind of smack it in the face. You need something to kind of temper and measure out those flavors.
I already pre-counted.
Huh?
I already pre-counted.
Oh, okay, so I need all these?
Yep.
All right, well then, I'm making another one.
So they make you the palate cleanser, by the way?
Oh, I've got almonds and club soda to serve as palate cleansers at your discretion. So don't feel like you need to do that between each course, I guess. But they're there.
To rinse out and change the taste or something like that, is that?
Between the daiquiri and the margarita, they're not necessarily going to need it.
The other one.
Thank you.
And I did try and structure this in such a way that we're kind of going from the lightest and most forgiving, and then progressing to the more intense ones as we go. And this is another one where people have a funny relationship with tequila, because you've got people that can drink tequila, and then you've got those people that swear they can never do that word again.
Kind of like
Huh?
I'm gonna go plus.
Yeah. I, in college, I got in a real bad fight with a bottle of Goldschlager, and so there was about a 5-year period where I could not hear the word without getting nauseated. So, yeah.
You found a way to get over that?
Yeah.
Bless you, because I never did. So.
Oh, I'm not saying that I drink this stuff.
But at least I can say the word without him kind of heaving.
Yeah.
But, you know, this is definitely one where it keeps things a little bit friendlier. And the other part is the reason why most people tend to not like most spirits is because they had a cheap one. All right, we're good to go with that. Thank you. And so, just like with, to give you an idea, with all the stuff here, I don't think any one of these bottles was more than, well, the Scotch was just north of 30, but there, you know, this is not more than $30 for a given bottle. And you can get quality spirit without having to pay a bunch of money.
I like that.
That's really good. It's not
That's
too
my
sweet.
sweet.
That's,
That's my sweet right there, Alice.
they're usually too sweet, and I
Food
order
choice.
them, I usually order them skinny, because I think they're too sweet.
Well, and that's it, is that if they're overly sweet, then you lose the taste of tequila, and at that point, it's just an alcoholic climate, which, I mean, cool, if that's your jam, but, you know, go buy yourself a bottle of Mike's Hard Lemonade and leave the drinking to the adults.
So what gives it that little bit of sweetness is the Cointreau?
That's the Cointreau. Yeah, because it's an orange liqueur, so liqueurs are typically going to be lower proof, sweeter spirits. So, you know, triple sec is an example. Trying to think of some other good ones off the top of my head. Amaretto is a popular one. You know, stuff like that. But
Elderflower?
yes, yeah, Saint Germain elderflower liqueur is that. That one got really popular when craft cocktails started kind of making its resurgence, and it's kind of started becoming like known as bartender's ketchup because they'll put it in just about anything to salvage a drink.
Really?
Yep. Now the next one is going to be probably one of the scarier ones, depending on what your drinking history has been, because we are getting into gin. This is one of those where people typically have a bad experience because they wound up getting hammered on plastic jug Seagrams when they were in high school or college, and now whenever they smell or taste it, their body is remembering that and thinking that they are trying to be poisoned.
It smells like this.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. Gin is another one of those where, like, when you think gin, think white wine, because, again, very much the same. There are gins that are very herbal. There are gins that are a lot sweeter. And so, depending on what you're looking for, you can find something that you like, and you can find something that's not necessarily your speed. London Dry Gin is the most kind of popular style, and that's your Beefeater, your Tanqueray, all that kind of stuff. The reason that I picked this particular drink is because the ratios on this one are a little bit different. It is a very old cocktail called the Gimlet, and in its original variation, it was equal parts gin and lime cordial. The difference between this and regular lime juice is, aside from the fact that this is synthetic, you know, corn syrup and yellow dye, they do taste different. If you're super geeky about it, you can make your own at home. But having seen some Pepsi challenges done flavor-wise, this can't just be replicated with lime juice and sugar, because there's a certain bitterness to the cordial that doesn't exist when you just go that route. Another reason why the Gimlet is a good introduction for people is because since the concentration of the gin is lower, it tends to accessible for people. So, I have never done a 3-portion stirred cocktail. And again, this is the only one of these that we're doing that is a stirred drink as opposed to shaken, because this is not technically fruit juice. It is kind of more of a syrup, so it doesn't need that same agitation to work in with the spirit. And if you were to shake this, it would feel kind of flat. Only drawback is that this ice doesn't crack quite as well when it sits out, but it'll make it work. Generally speaking, whenever you're doing a stirred drink, you want it just chock full of ice. And the ratio on this is going to be a little bit different, but we are making it work. Weirdly enough, the bar spoon is actually the best thing for the job because the bowl of it really concentrates the impact just right. It's just a matter of, ideally, you know, when they do this at a bar or when I'm doing this at home, ice that is fresh out of the freezer is a lot easier to crack than ice that has been kind of sitting out and had a chance to warm up and temper a little bit. So, but that's, you know, neither here nor there. A little sharp. So I'm gonna give it a few more stirrs.
Did you say there's 2 main ways to do it, and this is like the original?
So, yeah, the traditional way to do it is with the lime cordial. Some of the, in kind of the new craft cocktail movement where everybody is trying to keep things, you know, fresh, natural ingredients and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome. But what they've been doing is, depending on the bar that you go to, sometimes they will just mix this with simple syrup and lime. And it's not a bad drink, it just tastes a little bit different than the original. So,
Without that bitter.
What polyester versus a wool?
I would say it's not quite that. It's Super 110 versus Super 150.
Julie knows. There we go.
Hey.
Because they are both perfectly serviceable. No, you know, one is not necessarily bad, but one is notably inferior, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
So,
Noted.
but yeah, this is probably one of my favorite gin drinks. And at McCormick and Schmick's, on their happy hour, for the longest time, they actually had a cucumber gimlet on the menu that was one of my absolute favorites. And interestingly enough, depending on which gin you select, like Hendrick's, which is a fairly well-known one, has a lot of cucumber flavor to it. So that's typically what you see paired with it. But,
They do a lime basil one upstairs from Benji's, it's pretty tasty.
okay. And that's it. It's generally, if you're gonna do like variations on this, this is where you're gonna see a lot of stuff like different herbs come in. So like basil being a good example, or cucumber, thyme, rosemary is another one. So that's the kind of stuff that you see people play with.
So whenever you add like a fruit or a cucumber,
Mhm.
how do you muddle it, and shake it, or?
dealer's choice. I've seen people do it as like a cucumber syrup. I've seen people just take chunks of cucumber and muddle it. If you do that, you gotta be careful because it can be a little bitter if you go that route.
This whole thing is on sour. That was delicious. That's good. That
So-
is delicious.
That's pretty tasty.
Hey, that's hell of a
That's tasty.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's.
Oh, can you redo that one? Can you just redo that one?
If that is what you want, is
No,
yours,
no, you're good.
we can certainly make that happen.
It's like drinking a flower.
That is amazing.
It's been like years.
And so, the ratio that I'm using on this one is 2 ounces of gin to 1.5 ounces of the lime cordial, so it's not quite 50-50. Glad you like it. All right. Now we are going to start getting into some fun territory. First off, who wants to take a crack at one of these with me?
Ice cream, actually.
No, like, who wants to mix up a drink?
Bush, come on.
Cool. So, what we're going to do,
Anything, Alex?
yes, I am going to need
Stay sanitized.
that, and where's my hat? If you can reach this out for me, and then while you're over there, if you wouldn't mind bringing over the egg white.
Sit down and drink a whole glass of that.
I like the other one.
Okay, so while we're doing that kind of quick intermission and getting this set up, we're gonna jump into a whiskey sour. I like this for a few different reasons. Number one is it is a great way to introduce people to whiskey that maybe are not used to drinking more substantial spirits. You know, so it's got some acid in it. Because, you know, whiskey can be a pretty assertive flavor, and so the sour is a good way to kind of round that out. Now, depending on where you go and who you ask, there are different schools of thought on the whiskey sour, but there's one ingredient that I've got coming. It's in the door, top right. There you go. I'm of the opinion, and a lot of people agree with me, that in order to make a proper whiskey sour, it requires a white. For a couple of different reasons. Number one, it offers a phenomenally kind of frothy texture on top of it, and it also helps to strip out some of the kind of barrel bitterness that you get out of the whiskey, so it makes it a little bit friendlier. And what we're going to do to make your life easy is, all right, so that's what I'm going to do. Yeah, this is going to be your measure. 2 ounces, 1.5 ounces is indexed inside, full is 1 ounce, and then 3/4 is indexed inside. You'll make the single, I'll make the double, and again, so that you don't wind up getting anything exploded all over your nice suit, you are going to use the self-sealing. So, starting off,
You both look beautiful and very handsome, by the way.
closed courtesy of Ross Custom. Call that operator stand by.
Plug.
Y'all did look very
All right. So, generally speaking, when you're making a drink, especially if you're making one that you're unfamiliar with, the rule is you go to the cheapest ingredients first. So that way, if you screw something up, you're not dumping out the booze. So, just so you have for reference, you're going to be working off the single, and I'm going to be working off the double. So to start off, the least expensive ingredient out of the equation is going to be simple syrup. So since I'm doing a double, we are doing 1.5 ounces. You will be doing 3/4 ounce. So go ahead and into the tin, and just to kind of keep things interesting, so you can see what's going on here. Excellent. Next is going to be In this case, we are going to be using lemon juice as opposed to lime.
For lime?
Typically it's one of those where the tropical cocktails, tropical spirits tend to get the lime juice, and then everything else seems to get the lemon. So let's see, for that I've got 2 ounces, and again, you've got 1 ounce. Now, if you are squeamish about consuming raw egg, cartoned egg whites are your best bet because they're pasteurized, so there is no chance of foodborne illness. Generally speaking, most people just tend to have eggs laying around more than they do cartoned egg white. I've done it both ways. There's no difference in the texture, and I haven't gotten sick off of one yet, so do you. The other...
Not by the best. It's stones, right?
It's underneath this thing right here.
Oh, is it?
Professional versus professional training.
Yes. Thank you. All right, and so the other advantage is putting the lemon juice and the egg white in first. It's kind of giving the same effect as ceviche, where it's cooking the protein a little bit. And so it helps to kind of cut down on any potential issues. And so I'm doing 4 ounces of bourbon, and you'll be doing 2. Now the first part of this, you notice we haven't actually added any ice yet. There's a reason for that. Because in order to get that foam, we need to build a little bit of air in it.
And if
So-
you add that first, it goes.
What you're going to want to do is screw that cap on nice and tight. And then just check the strainer cap too, just to be safe. Just in case. Got it. Because when you're shaking in a normal tin and tin set like this, the ice makes the air inside cold, which makes it contract, which creates a vacuum. So when you're doing it without ice, you have to hang on for dear life so the drink doesn't explode all over you. When it comes to shaking a cocktail, you typically want to do it at chest level.
Sorry.
No bread.
But a lot of pressure.
And so what we are doing here, I have a really lousy seal on that, don't I?
Yeah, you did.
Keep going. We ain't done.
Bring it over the shoulder.
Well, actually, so a bartender buddy of mine said the reason I want to keep it at chest level is if you go over your shoulders and you do that long enough, you can jack up your rotator cuff.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah, repetitious stress injury. So, but basically, what we're doing at this point is just whipping the egg white. It's like a meringue.
Sounds just as dangerous as football.
Can be.
You're doing great, huh?
Right.
All right, we good.
Shake weight.
Yeah, right?
Brian, keep shaking. I'm never letting that.
Saving that one.
I can't take that cap off.
That's really the big part.
Same deal. So that whole cube I put in front of you.
Would anybody like to see it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it. And so the idea is, yeah, just kind of sharp. You tend to get a better hit if you pull further back on the spoon and just kind of whip it. Yep, there you go. See, exactly right. All right, so you got that cracked. Then you go ahead and put one full cube in there as well. Yeah. I think he's smart. He's got the business pointing away from us.
Oh, I've seen that happen before.
All right.
Brian, you look like you're having too much fun.
I'm a pro.
All natural.
So, got that going. And so, now, I'm gonna have to kind of get creative with this because I don't just want to be pouring foam for people.
Like in a clear glass, later, like.
And this is another one where, you know, dealer's choice if you want to serve it over ice or if you want to serve it in a stemware. So everybody's preference is different on that. I generally like to go straight up neat and then garnish it with a little bit of Angostura. Angostura bitters is it's a fixture on just about every bar you've ever been to. It's that stuff right there. And if you were ever to taste it straight, which I actually recommend doing with any and all ingredients that you ever cook and or mix with, because that way you get a better idea of exactly what it's adding to the equation.
Or if your stomach hurts, you can put a few drops in, so good.
Yeah, actually, it works really well as a digestive like that. This one doesn't work quite as well portioned, unfortunately. But if you want to top off, yep. The rest of those.
If you put these, or the other top of it on and screw the little top off.
Yep,
That's
exactly
right.
right. Got it.
Now screw the lid on.
Yeah.
Oh, smart.
What's that?
Angostura.
Say that again?
That's the Angostura bitters.
Possibly just because we let it sit.
You can pour it straight into the things, like we don't care if it's all messy.
But the good news is I can come in and probably top it off with a little bit of that.
Alex, you're a pro.
Yeah. This is all 100% self-taught.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, this is also the reason why some of the items of clothing in my closet don't fit as well anymore.
I know that's.
And then we'll bring back my stuff, so we get them right here.
If I had bought them here, yes, but
Now you get them all.
so and this is a 100% unsolicited plug, but he did have one of my jackets recut for me and did a phenomenal job with it. So yes, I bring all my stuff here. Go ahead.
This is probably going to be my favorite here. Well, listen, guys.
Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
That gin is going to be.
Having a business, is that correct? You're starting like, they started.
Okay.
So I think there was a Walgreens across the street. So what would you recommend for somebody that has a food allergy like me, that just to cut that completely out?
Great question.
Alternative?
And I apologize for
No,
not asking.
no, please.
Well, you know, even so. Weirdly enough, the best egg white substitute is what's called aquafaba. It is the juice. It is the juice from when you strain out a can of garbanzo beans, chickpeas. Yeah. Froths up exactly the same, and it doesn't taste any different. Cheers. Cheers.
Trust me again.
All good.
I think that beats the gin.
Thank you, sir. Awesome. Appreciate that.
That
Absolutely.
beats the gin for me.
That beats the gin.
Yeah.
That's good. Excellent.
Yeah. You can't even taste the whiskey. just a slight in.
Well, and so, and again, that's one of those where
Good work.
the egg white strips out a lot of what's really aggressive, but where, at least where I get it, it dries my tongue out immediately.
Yeah.
And so that's from the barrel. And then you get that kind of woodiness in the background afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind. Actually, yeah, just let's go ahead and do, because this one did not have it.
That's
Like,
dangerous.
So that one and then this one has the egg white in it? And I take it out?
yes, please.
Okay, and then that one did?
Yes. All right, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much.
So we got one more coming,
Uh-oh.
and this is one that I had tried for the first time 3 months ago, maybe, because I was never a real big Scotch person. I don't mind it, but it's not necessarily one of the things that I will default to when I'm drinking on the farm. And so I discovered that it's one of those things where you've got musicians that you like because stylistically, their sound, the way everything's composed, it resonates with you. Bartenders tend to be kind of the same. And so I found out about a bartender by the name of Sam Ross. He worked at a bar up in New York. And so I kind of did a little bit of research, started looking at some of what came out of that restaurant, or excuse me, what came out of that bar, and
Good name.
exactly. So I just started trying other stuff that he made. And so when I found out that he made a Scotch cocktail, I was interested. I was like, all right, well, let's see about this. And because it calls for a very heavily peated, aggressive Isla Scotch on the fin, it's not the main spirit, but they actually use it kind of as a finisher. That's also what caught my attention. Just to give y'all an idea, if you wouldn't mind,
Judas, if I can interject, what do you mean by finisher?
pass that around and just let everybody smell it.
So awesome. What do you mean by finisher?
You'll see. It's basically almost as a garnish. Yeah, it smells like iodine and Band-Aids. Yeah, and there are people that voluntarily drink that for fun. I'm the only time that I have enjoyed,
Yeah.
quite
Those
literally,
are gone right now.
the only time that I have ever enjoyed drinking Isla Scotch, a buddy of mine was getting married up in New York, and it was the middle of November. We had just walked from his ceremony to his reception, 6 blocks of the most miserably cold bullshit you can imagine. That is when you drink that kind of stuff. It's when you're just hating life and angry at the world. But it caught my attention. And what's interesting is that it's an aggressive flavor that is tempered by another very aggressive flavor, which is ginger. So I gave it a try, and not only did I enjoy it, but it is a surprisingly refreshing cocktail for it being Scotch-based. Plus, it's called penicillin. So, penicillin.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Like, Google penicillin cocktail, you will pull up this recipe.
I love ginger and cocktails.
Yeah, you're educating us right now.
Well, and again, that's the entire thing. But just like everything else, it's based on a foundation of nothing but Scotch whiskey, lemon juice, and the sweetener is the ginger syrup. The Band-Aid smell is just a little garnish on top. So the base Scotch is a blended Scotch called Monkey Shoulder. again, for not being a Scotch person, I'm actually kind of a fan of this. It's fairly accessible, it's pretty friendly, it's easier to drink. The name comes from a physical condition that the dudes that work. So Scotch is, what makes Scotch Scotch is, just like how Tennessee whiskey has to be filtered through charcoal, Scotch whiskey is barley based, and the barley is dried over a fire where the fuel that they use is peat. It's this kind of boggy, mossy material that is all over the place in Scotland, and they were using it as firewood for centuries, and they used what they had. It gives a very specific flavor to the whiskey, and the guys that were working the peat bogs, that were excavating this and digging it out, all wound up hunched over, and it was called monkey shoulder. Yeah. So this one is going to be that's about 6 ounces of Scotch.
What was the guy's name that created this, Alex?
The bartender's name was Sam Ross. He worked at a bar up in New York that is now since closed, called Milk and Honey, run by a fellow by the name of Sasha Petrosky, who was kind of, why am I blanking on the guy that runs Anvil and all of those down here? He was a local, a local bar magnate, restaurateur kind of deal. And there's a couple of different establishments that he ran. It just became very
Bobby
big.
Hubel.
Pardon? Yeah, Bobby Hubel, thank you.
I was doing the same.
And all of those locations were very much at kind of the center of the cocktail renaissance that started coming up in the late 90s, early 2000s. 2¼ ounces of ginger syrup. Now, I will say I'm cheating on this a little bit. The recipe calls for a ginger honey syrup, but I didn't feel like making that. So,
One of the commenters says, Tyler Jones says, Island Scotches were his favorite. This is what got him into whiskey. Ardbeg is his favorite, and he's only 23.
my God.
And Monkey Shoulder delightfully apricot forward.
Okay. I don't think I've ever gotten an apricot from it, but I'm not going to argue that. No. I think they did. Yeah. It's a great combo. I mean, everything from the Kentucky Mule to this. There we go. A really good seal on that, and half the time when I have to crack that open, I have to wear it. But yeah, I found out about Sam Ross because one of his, I'm not going to say invention, it's more of a variation, has become one of my favorite drinks of all time, which is a paper plane. Depending on exactly how popular this is, I was thinking that it might end up turning into a series. And later on down the line, I was thinking about touching on equal parts cocktails. There are some that are exactly that, either a 1-to-1 or, for example, the paper plane is 4 ingredients, all equal parts, 3/4 of an ounce each. And it's a whiskey-based cocktail with a lot of
No.
It's got lemon juice in it and a couple of Italian bitter liqueurs. I am one of those weird people that likes more kind of bitter medicinal flavored stuff. Danielle likes to joke.
You have a question from the crowd. Where are you from?
Originally, I grew up in DC, but my family is from Southern Italy. So I'm sure that's part of it is the fact that it's just in my blood.
And I like to joke what?
Oh, that the drinks that I enjoy are basically cough syrup.
Yeah.
So,
No, but you do them wonderful.
and so when I say that the Isle of Scotch gets used as a garnish,
Oh, literally.
Wow.
It's a garnish.
Now I see that. All right.
now when you're doing this as a full drink, typically it is like a bar spoon's worth that's just floated over top. But yeah, I'm not doing that for 15 of those things.
No, I liked the spray, that was
Oh, wow.
Source vitality.
Well, I mean, not gonna lie, this is literally just a $2,
Yeah.
pump spray bottle from Container Store. As long as you're using food safe plastic, although you shouldn't store alcohol in it. It's only been in there for a couple hours.
Wow. From gasoline to amazing.
It's got an interesting little evolution, doesn't it?
Very.
Wow.
fun. It's really good. It tastes different than it sounds.
Yep.
Thank goodness.
No, that's, yeah, smell versus taste.
Yeah. I used to.
Because it still has that smell, but the taste is like,
Fresh, like fresh drink.
it's penicillin.
You can trust us, sir.
So,
Alex.
all right, well, hey, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna go ahead and kill the live stream because I'm gonna start actually socializing a little bit. But thank you guys for tuning in, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. Stay safe and stay sharp.
Hey.